felt the rupture like a cracking mirror behind my ribs. Suddenly, I wasn't just seeing the thing inside, I was sharing space with it. Memories that weren't mine slid into place like misplaced teeth. Moments I hadn't lived yet. Mistakes I hadn't made. Victories I'd abandoned before earning. Saw myself standing in a circle of bleeding sigils, a crowd of figures kneeling around me. I saw my hand covered in blood, mine or someone else's I didn't know, and I saw my face, not older, not broken, becoming. A question echoed through my mind, not in words but in pressure. So will you carry this? The thing in the box smiled wider. Or will you break beneath it? I looked at it, looked at me, and I whispered back, steady, cold. I didn't open the box to break. The flickering stopped, the smile faded, and the thing in the box dissolved, folded inward, like smoke being pulled into a lung. My body jolted, my mind steadied, and then everything was quiet, truly quiet. The box was empty now, but I wasn't. I stepped back from the table, the room spinning just slightly. In my chest, something new pulsed, a rhythm I hadn't known I was missing. And deep in the corner of the room, the graven index flipped to a new page. Words inked themselves in as I watched. The box is not always what's delivered, sometimes it's what delivers you. There were new names waiting, and the path ahead had begun to bend, not away from me, toward. The graven index lay open on the floor, its pages turning in a wind that didn't exist. My fingers ached, not from pain, but from what they now remembered. Tracing chalk sigils not yet drawn, holding items I hadn't yet earned. The book pulsed once and stopped on a page inked in deep crimson, the kind that stained memory more than skin. At the top, a new name etched itself slowly. Miracle of the Hollow Step, the one who walks between sounds. Sees the words you never said, answers the spaces where you were silent. To summon, say nothing, simply listen. There was no sigil, no phrase, just a blank space beneath the name. I didn't speak. The light in the room dimmed, just a breath, a flicker. And then, I heard it, a footstep soft as a sigh behind me. Another, to the left, not aggressive, just curious. I stayed still, breath caught halfway. Then came the whisper, not in my ears, but inside my chest. You've begun walking crooked. I turned slowly. A figure stood in the corner of the room, where light always struggled to reach. Its limbs were long, too long, its face blurred in motion, like it was shifting between truths I couldn't hold on to. It didn't move toward me. It didn't speak again. It simply watched. I realized then that Miro wasn't here for conversation. They were here to see if I would fall silent, because silence was how they listened. Silence was how they judged. I sat, no words, no movement, just stillness. And in that stillness, something inside me uncoiled. All the unsaid things, things I never had the voice for or the space to speak, began to rise. Not out loud, inward. Pain I pretended didn't matter. Longing I buried under laughter. Rage I dressed in clever phrases. Love I never admitted. All of it poured into the space between me and Myro. And they nodded. No smile, no praise, just acknowledgement. And then they were gone. The silence remained. But now, it felt like armor. I rose. The coin of binding burned hot in my pocket. The tincture pulsed, still sealed but expectant. The graven index turned one more page. This time there were no instructions, no names, just a question written in harsh, angular ink. What do you want to become? Not a warning, a challenge. And I knew next time the phone rang, it wouldn't just be a delivery. It would be an invitation to answer that question, with blood, with shadow, or with silence. And I wouldn't hesitate. I didn't answer the question aloud. The page didn't need my voice. The index wasn't a book. It was a mirror, confession, a seed planted in my spine. It would wait. The next 3 days passed like breath in a fog. Not gone, not clear, I didn't sleep much, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. Something had shifted after the box, after Morel. My body obeyed me now in ways it hadn't before. My thoughts no longer chased themselves in circles. They followed lines, symbols, intent. I used that time to prepare. I memorized the names I'd summoned, traced their sigils onto glass with condensation, then wiped them away like they were secrets meant only for the dead. I walked the edge of the city where the old magic pooled, cemeteries, cracked churches, alleyways no longer listed on maps. Not to stir trouble, but to listen, to let the silence recognize me. On the fourth day, the phone rang. No message, just a vibration that didn't end until I touched it. The screen read, "You've been requested." No name. Just coordinates that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The world bent differently as I followed. Street signs didn't stay in the corners of my eyes. Time moved wrong. When I blinked, shadows were elsewhere than before. I arrived at a building that shouldn't exist. A black tower nestled between two crumbling warehouses. No windows, no door, but the coin of binding burned hot in my hand, and so I pressed it to the wall. There was no sound, but something unlatched. The wall folded inward, revealing a single corridor lit with blood-red lanterns. The light didn't flicker. It hummed like a pulse echoing through old bones. At the end of the hallway was a room. In that room, a chair, and someone in it. Not a creature. A person, human, young, terrified. They looked up at me with hollow eyes and whispered, "Are you the one who's come to bind me?" I didn't answer right away, because I felt it, that pull, the kind that doesn't come from duty, it comes from being chosen. My eyes dropped to their wrists. They were holding a coin, silver, one side blank, the other with my face. The room narrowed, and I understood. This wasn't about the jobs anymore. They had called me, and I was about to find out why. My breath slowed, not from fear, but from weight. Something old and invisible had just settled over the room. A ritual without words, a binding made not with force, but with recognition. They held the coin out with shaking hands, fingers trembling like a leaf caught between seasons. My face on one side, the blank on the other. "You didn't mean to," they whispered, voice raw. I didn't know what I was doing. "You used my name," I said quietly. "You turned the coin." They nodded, shame burning in their eyes like they'd swallowed the sun too fast. I was desperate, they said. And now, it's not just following me anymore. It's feeding. It wants something. It said it belongs to you. Of course it did. This was no accident. The coin doesn't fall unless it's meant to. And when you flip it, you get what you deserve. I stepped forward, pulling the graven index from my coat. Its cover pulsed, sensing the truth of the room. "You called me to save you," I said. "But bindings come with balance. What you take, you must replace." "I don't have anything left to give." I raised an eyebrow. "Then it'll take you." Silence. Then, "I'll give you it," they whispered. "The thing I summoned, the one pretending to protect me." That stopped me cold. I hadn't expected a trade. But that's the thing about power. It's not just about what you can take. It's about what you're offered. And this was the kind of offer that changed the shape of the path ahead. I opened the index to a blank page. The room darkened, the lanterns dimmed, and behind us, from the corner where no shadows should have reached, it stepped in. The entity was faceless, humanoid only in outline. Its presence felt like cold hunger, like the silence in a grave where someone's been whispering too long. It looked at the one who summoned it, then at me. "Give me your name," I said. It said nothing. Instead, it knelt. The moment its knees touched the floor, the coin in the summoner's hand split down the center, silver and shadow. One half fell to the ground. The other burned itself into my palm. A new name etched itself into the graven index. Valeth, the hollow promise, bound by accident, held by will, used only once, feeds on guilt. The summoner wept silently, and me, I stood taller, Another tool, another piece on the board, but this one didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to me. And the next time someone dared whisper my name without knowing the weight behind it, I'd have Valeth whisper back. Valeth rose with the grace of an apology, slow, deliberate, shrouded in absence. Where it stood, the shadows thickened. Where it looked, nothing else dared move. It didn't ask for orders. It didn't need to. It already knew where it belonged. Inside me. The summoner, no, the debtor, watched from the chair, their eyes hollowed out by what they'd seen. Or maybe what they'd become. Without the coin, they looked smaller, like they'd been emptied, the echo of their desperation still trembling in the corners of the room. "You're safe," I told them. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. Was anyone who called me safe? Valeth turned without sound and walked behind me. Its form dissolved into my shadow, stretching beneath my feet like a second spine. I didn't look back. Outside, the city was damp and strange. Rain drifted in threads that didn't fall straight. They curved as if they, too, obeyed something unseen. The streets knew me now. Not the people, no, the streets. The forgotten veins of the city. Cracks in the concrete where magic pooled like rot. I walked through them, and they whispered my steps back to me. By the time I returned to my apartment, the graven index had already flipped to a new page. Core, the dream archivist, keeper of broken futures and stitched timelines, will show you what was once meant to be if you let them take what never was. My hand hovered over the page, and something in me twisted. Futures, choices, versions of myself that might have lived. This wasn't a hunt anymore. This wasn't survival. This was transformation. But not in a single moment. No flash of power. No dramatic oath. This was slow, terrible, sacred. I closed the book. Not yet. I needed silence, rest, the kind that seeps into the bones and lets the soul adjust to its new weight. But as I stood in the candlelight, cloak damp, boots echoing faintly on the floorboards, I felt the next version of me already stirring. And he wasn't quite human anymore. Not less. Just rearranged. That night, sleep came like a fog creeping under the door. Unasked for, but undeniable. I didn't fight it. I let it take me. And it wasn't dreams that followed. It was memory. Not mine. Not exactly. I stood in a room that didn't exist, made of rusted mirrors and burning sand. Above me, constellations spun too fast, and each one whispered a different version of my name. Some soft, some screaming. Before me sat a desk carved from bone, and behind it, a figure without a face. Their hands moved like ink and water, flipping through pages I couldn't see, pages that bled light. I knew who it was. Core, the dream archivist. Without words, it lifted one glowing page and slid it across the desk toward me. I reached for it. My fingertips grazed the edge, and the world ripped. Suddenly, I was him. A version of me that never took the job, that never found the package, never followed the candle smoke, never opened the graven index. He lived in a small apartment, quiet, normal. There was warmth in his eyes, but his smile never reached far. He aged slowly, numb, unnoticed. No shadows whispered his name. No watchers watched. He died at 67, in his sleep, peaceful, forgotten. I pulled away. The vision burned out in a white flash, and I was back in the mirror sand room, breathing hard, the archivist still watching. No judgment, no sorrow, just inventory. Then it offered a second page. This one bled. When I touched it, I saw another me, not dead, not forgotten, feared. I stood at the center of a cracked cathedral, surrounded by kneeling silhouettes, some human, some not. My hand held a book that pulsed with red light. My voice moved the air like iron through water. Entities bowed. Names were erased, and I smiled, because I wanted to. I tore away before the vision could root too deep. Back in the mirror sand room, the archivist tilted its head. It knew the truth now. So did I. I would not die forgotten for what I did, for what I built, and for what I dared to bind. When I woke, the candlelight had dimmed. The room was still. The graven index lay closed beside me. Quiet for now, but inside it, another page was forming. Waiting for the next name, waiting for mine. I didn't move at first, not because I was afraid. No, fear had long since become something quieter, less a warning, more a companion. I lay there, in the amber flicker of a dying candle, the weight of dreams still clinging like smoke to my skin. Core had shown me what I could have been, what I might become. But the truth was simpler than any vision I had already chosen, and choices have teeth. I sat up slowly, the graven index cold against my thigh. I didn't open it. Not yet. Its silence was reverent now, like it too was waiting to see what I would do with the knowledge it had given me. Across the room, Valeth's shadow flickered once across the far wall like a warning, or a promise. I rose and poured water from a glass left untouched. It tasted like memory, faintly metallic, older than the apartment should have allowed. The city outside had gone still, not asleep, just listening. I stepped to the window. Below, the streets curved unnaturally, like they'd forgotten their original purpose and decided to rewrite themselves. A lamppost blinked out, not in failure but in deference. Something in the dark had passed under it, and in that moment, I felt it. A new thread being tugged. Someone had just said my name, not as a whisper, not by mistake. A call. My hand moved without thinking, reaching for the coin of binding. It burned hot, no longer passive. This was active magic now. This was summons. The graven index fluttered open behind me, pages flipping to the newest mark etched into its spine. Not a name. A symbol. A sigil shaped like a mouth sewn shut, with teeth spilling out from beneath the stitches. Beneath it, 3 words etched themselves. Come. Unspoken. Devour. A soft sound filled the apartment. Claws on tile. Vela stepped from my shadow, no longer formless. It had a shape now, a shape it borrowed from me, taller, sharper, wearing my grin like a blade. It pointed to the door. The phone buzzed once. The one who called you was waiting. No location, no warning, just intent. I didn't bring a bag. I didn't need gear. I was the ritual now. As I stepped through the door, the city bent around me like it knew who I was becoming. No more guesses, no more waiting. The devouring had begun, and I was hungry. The door shut behind me without a sound. The hallway outside didn't feel like part of my building anymore. It had narrowed, elongated, the lights above flickering in a rhythmic pulse, like they were sinking to a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Valeth followed, silent as regret. I moved through the shifting corridor without hesitation. The coin of binding pulsed in my palm, the metal alive with heat and hunger. Whoever had called me didn't do it lightly. This wasn't a plea, it was a bargain. The hallway opened into a space I couldn't place, part train station, part cathedral, part ruin. Glass walls reflected things that weren't happening. Echoes bounced from directions that didn't exist. In the center of the room stood a figure cloaked in crimson, face veiled, hands bare. One hand held a burning match. The other, a torn piece of parchment bearing a symbol I recognized. My sigil. Not one I had drawn, but one that had grown somehow from me. A design stitched together from chalk dust, blood ink, and the eyes of the things I'd bound. They dropped the match. It fell to the floor, striking a circle of salt I hadn't seen. Fire erupted, not outward but upward, forming a column that wrapped them in light, leaving only shadow beneath. Their voice came low, carved from smoke and ash. You walk with ghosts now. I didn't reply. I called you not to bind me, they said, but to be bound by you. That made me pause. Not surrender, offering. The fire dimmed. They stepped forward. When the veil lifted, I saw a face I knew, not from memory, from the graven index. A page that had never opened, a name never written. Their smile was calm, certain. I am the future you haven't earned yet, And suddenly I understood. This wasn't a mission. This wasn't a task. This was me, calling myself, testing myself, challenging the shape I'd taken and the one I was still becoming. The figure stepped closer, placing something cold in my hand. Another coin, both sides blank, so you choose which face it shows. Then they vanished. No sound, no light, just absence. I stood there in the ruined glass and echo light, holding a coin that reflected nothing yet. And for the first time, I smiled, because now I knew exactly what I would carve into it. And the world would never forget that face. The coin was heavier than it should have been, blank on both sides, yet somehow full, like it had already seen too many versions of me, just waiting to be chosen. It pulsed faintly in my palm, syncing with my heartbeat, or rewriting it. I tucked it into the space beside the coin of binding, and as soon as the two touched, a low hum rippled through the air. The city around me shivered, not visibly, not structurally, but spiritually, as if something ancient had just updated its records. Valith moved beside me, its new form still echoing my own, its grin deeper now, closer to devotion. It whispered, but not in words. Its presence filled the space behind my ribs with the sense that something important had just been marked. A contract, a naming, not yet spoken, but undeniable. The graven index tugged at my side, vibrating softly. I opened it. A new page, no name, just a sigil, a coin, half shadowed, half engraved. And beneath it, ink written in a spiral, drawing the eye inward like a trap. And you are no longer just the one who delivers. You are the door. You are the threshold. I stared at the words until they stopped looking like language and started feeling like instruction. A new task was coming, not a delivery, a summoning. I returned home through streets that no longer recognized their own geometry. Traffic lights blinked in reversed patterns. Street names were missing. My door wasn't where it used to be, just near it. But I found it. The moment I stepped through, every candle in the room flickered to life. The coin in my pocket was burning now. It wanted to be used, but not on someone else, on me. The blank faces weren't waiting to be assigned. They were waiting to reflect what I was finally ready to become. No more fragments, no more glimpses of paths not walked. It was time to carve my sigil into the shape of my future. I lit the circle, I drew the lines, and I whispered my name. Not the one I was given, but the one I had earned. And the coin listened, and the city shuddered. And somewhere deep in the bones of the world, the next entity opened its eyes and whispered back. The air inside my apartment thickened as the sigil burned itself into the chalk circle, not with fire, but with meaning. The lines hissed, not from heat, but from pressure, as if language itself was folding inward, reshaping the space between my ribs. I held the blank coin between two fingers. Above the circle, the shadows trembled, and I spoke, not to any god, not to any watcher or entity, but to myself. The name I whispered wasn't in any registry. It didn't come from birth, or bloodline, or grief. It was forged in the silences I survived, carved from the hunger that followed every choice. The moment it left my lips, the coin flared white hot, then sank into darkness. A new face appeared on one side, mine, but not the me who opened the first package. This was the one who had watched the watchers, who summoned without trembling, who walked crooked and made the world lean with him. On the other side, the symbol, the spiral sigil from the graven index page, now etched in silver. The moment the coin's second side was sealed, the candle snapped upward into perfect stillness. Not flickering, not moving, held. And then the door behind me opened on its own. No one was there, but the room filled with breath, not mine. A presence stepped through without stepping. Not seen, but felt. And then a voice, threshold, not a question, a title. Another whisper followed, closer, deeper. He has named himself. Shall we test the walls of what he's built? I turned, and something passed beside me, cold, patient. A figure stepped from the shadows. It wasn't an entity I'd summoned. It was the first one, the one from the restaurant, the one who'd offered the job. They smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. "You've done well," they said, "but this next delivery isn't something you can carry in your hands." I nodded, calm. "What is it?" They leaned close. "You're delivering yourself. To what comes next?" They handed me a folded piece of paper. It was warm. Inside, a single line, scrawled in a language I'd never studied, but I understood. A new location, a new test, and beneath it, written in black ash, "Come alone, or not at all." I turned back to the circle. The coin was gone, but the sigil it left behind glowed. My path was set, and this time, I wasn't walking into the unknown. I was the unknown. The sigil on the floor faded as I stepped away, not extinguished, absorbed. The wood beneath my feet felt different, as though it remembered the shape of the power that had just passed through it. This place wasn't just mine anymore. It was becoming a crossroads. The paper in my hand thrummed gently. The address scrawled on it was more concept than location, part street, part feeling. Something I had to sense more than read. I left the apartment without looking back. This wasn't a place I'd be returning to the same. The path twisted. I crossed into parts of the city I didn't know existed, not because I hadn't walked them, but because they hadn't been there until now. Streetlights flickered into being only after I passed beneath them. The sky overhead held no stars, just soft pulses of violet and black, like the city had grown its own heartbeat. Eventually, the air changed. I stopped in front of a door, freestanding in an alley where no building should be. A door with no frame, no handle, and no hinges. It was painted red, the kind of red you see in dying fire, and carved into its center, barely visible, "Deliver yourself." I placed my palm against it. The wood dissolved like wet paper. Beyond it, darkness. Not empty, expectant. I stepped through. The space inside wasn't a room. It wasn't even a place. It was a threshold, stretched wide and breathing. Every step forward echoed without sound. The walls rippled like fabric stretched over bones. In the center stood a chair, plain wooden, but bleeding shadows from its feet. And in that chair, me, or something close. It looked up as I approached, its eyes reflecting every version of myself I had refused to become, starved, worshipped, forgotten, feared. It didn't speak, it just held out a hand. Between its fingers, a key, black iron, teeth curved in impossible shapes. "Do you accept?" it asked, not aloud, but through every memory I'd ever tried to bury. "What this opens." I took the key. It was warm. And behind me, the door I entered through sealed shut. I didn't flinch. This was never about escaping. It was about unlocking. And now, the only way forward was through me. The figure in the chair smiled and vanished, and I was left alone, holding a key that no lock had ever dared wear, until now. And somewhere ahead, the next door waited. Mine stood in the center of that unplace, holding a key forged from my own refusal. The silence around me wasn't dead. It was listening, not with ears, but with memory. Every breath I took felt recorded, measured. I looked at the space where the chair had been. Gone now. Even its shadow had been erased. Only one thing remained, a path, narrow, unlit, carved from something older than stone. It wasn't a hallway, not exactly. It was a memory of movement, an echo of every step I had taken to get here. And at the far end, pulsing like a wound, a door, but not like the last one. This one was made of mirrored glass, fractured down the middle. Behind it, I could see flickers of light, flashes of moments I hadn't lived yet. Some beautiful, some monstrous, all of them mine. The key vibrated in my hand, not with urgency, with permission. I stepped forward slow, every footfall feeling like I was pressing deeper into the blueprint of my own becoming. When I reached the door, the reflection looked up at me. Again, me, but raw, not broken, not corrupted, honest. He nodded once, and I pressed the key into the crack. It didn't twist. It dissolved. The mirror door shattered inward without a sound, and I walked through. The air shifted instantly, warmer, alive. This place wasn't void, it was full. Ceilings arched with constellations I didn't recognize. Symbols moved along the walls, sliding like thoughts across skin. In the center of the chamber stood an altar. Upon it 3 objects waited. No labels, no instruction, just truth. First, a blade made of bone, wrapped in red wire. Second, a book bound in shadow, with no visible pages. Third, a mask. Black porcelain, faceless, but soft around the edges like it had been worn by someone who once wept. I didn't need to be told. These were the tools of what came next, each one a different version of how I would walk forward. The blade for the destroyer, the book for the manipulator, the mask for the guide. I reached out, but didn't touch, not yet, because for the first time, I wasn't choosing between what to take, I was deciding what kind of god I would become. My hand hovered above the altar. The bone blade pulsed with anticipation, aching to be wielded. The wire wrapping around its hilt seemed to twitch, eager for purpose. It promised war, power through fear, a future sharpened on sacrifice. The book, shrouded in shadow, didn't hum, it waited. Not silent, but coiled. It held knowledge that could unmake kings or rewrite the rules whispered between realms. It promised power through truth and through lies. And the mask, it stared back at me, faceless and gentle. Its surface gleamed like still water. Wearing it meant vanishing, becoming symbol, meaning more while being seen less. It offered power through mystery, guidance by surrender. All 3 were me, all 3 had been me, and in some timeline still curling out of the graven index, all 3 would be me, but only one could lead now. I reached forward and placed my hand upon the mask. It was cool, softer than porcelain should be. As my fingers closed around it, I felt the weight of every gaze I'd ever turned away from. Every truth I'd chosen to leave unspoken. Every time I stepped back, not in weakness, but in design. The mask lifted without resistance, and I placed it over my face. There was no clasp, no strap, it simply fused. The world didn't darken, it clarified. I didn't disappear, I unfolded. Became more than shape, became presence. I was no longer just Carly. I was a concept wearing his bones. The altar dimmed. The blade dissolved into dust. The book snapped shut and fell into shadow. Only the path ahead remained, now split into 3 spiraling staircases. One coiled upward into pale cold light. One descended into thick roots and pulsing earth. The last went sideways, into fog and glass and soft echoing footsteps that didn't belong to me. The mask did not tell me which to take, because now that choice didn't belong to the path. It belonged to me, and without fear, without pause, I stepped into the mist, and it closed around me like a second skin. The fog swallowed me, thick and weightless, like memory that hadn't yet decided whether to stay or fade. Each step forward felt suspended, not on ground, not in air, but in meaning. Somewhere in the distance I heard footsteps that mirrored mine, but never synced. The mask molded closer to my face, not suffocating, but fusing. It didn't hide me. It made me unreadable. I could feel it even in the mist, eyes sliding past, forces trying to see and failing. I had become the space between perception and truth. The mist shifted. Up ahead a figure stood, still, waiting, not an entity, not a threat, a mirror. Tall, arched, rimmed in iron so old it had forgotten its own origin. Its surface shimmered, not reflecting my body but my choices. The blade, the book, the mask. Each image flickered across the glass like echoes on water, bleeding into one another, trying to make a shape they'd never worn before. Then, from behind the mirror, a whisper, not language, invitation. I reached toward the glass, hand steady, and the mirror shattered without sound. Not away from me, into me. Each shard dissolved as it touched my skin, and I felt it. Threads of the blade, the book pulled through the mask. Not to be held, not yet, but to be known. I could hear them now, faintly, dormant but not gone. The blade would return when mercy failed, the book when silence couldn't hide the truth, and the mask would carry me until both were needed again. I walked forward, the mist parted, and I stepped into a chamber that pulsed like a lung. The next page of the graven index floated mid-air, ink still wet. One word bled through the paper like it had been waiting. Ascend. And from above, in that breathless chamber of shifting light, a staircase began to fall. The staircase didn't descend like stone or wood. It folded downward, spiraling from nothing, each step unraveling from the air as if reality were making room just for me. It hovered over an endless dark, suspended by something older than gravity. Each step I took felt observed, not judged, not weighed, just marked. The mask on my face adjusted as I climbed. It grew warmer, clearer, like it wasn't just hiding me anymore, it was sharpening me. My breath didn't echo. My heartbeat didn't matter. I wasn't walking toward anything. I was being drawn. After what felt like minutes or centuries, I reached the top. A door waited. Black wood, a handle of bone, no keyhole. On the front, carved deep, "If you are not ready, do not open this door. If you are ready, open it anyway." I didn't hesitate. I turned the bone handle. The door didn't swing, it peeled. And what lay beyond was not a room. It was a throne, a cathedral-sized chamber lit by floating embers that drifted through the air like memories. At its center, a massive obsidian throne cracked down the middle. It was empty, but not untouched. On the floor before it, a spiral of symbols stretched outward, and at each curve, an item I recognized. The coin of binding, the tincture of the hollow voice, the vial of eclipses, the ring of insight, the stone of vitality, the graven index, the mask, and beside them, faint but flickering, the book and the blade, all present, all waiting. A voice bloomed in the silence, not spoken aloud, but heard in the ribs, the spine, the blood. "These are not just tools. They are fragments of you, earned and unforgotten. You may sit, but once you do, you no longer follow the story. You become the one who writes it." The throne didn't demand, it offered. No crown, no applause, just the chance to shape what comes next. I stepped forward. My fingers brushed the spiral as I walked. The mask pulsed, the index trembled, and I sat. Not in comfort, not in power, in choice. And the throne accepted me. The throne didn't feel like stone or metal. It felt like memory made solid, cool, familiar, and unspeakably alive. It adjusted to me, reshaping itself around my spine, not to comfort, but to fit. The moment I sat, everything in the chamber stilled. Even the floating embers froze midair. My heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from alignment. The items on the spiral began to hum, softly at first, then louder. Not sound, vibration, recognition, each one acknowledging my presence. Not as a wielder, not even as a master, as a centerpiece. I closed my eyes, and the throne began to feed me. Not food, not light, understanding. I saw every step that had led me here, each package, each name, each summoning. I felt the masks I'd worn and the voices I'd spoken in. I tasted the weight of decisions I hadn't even realized I'd made. And deeper still, I felt the paths I hadn't taken. The book, still sealed in shadow, whispered truths too sharp to name. The blade pulsed with battles not yet begun. Beneath it all, the mask warmed, its presence no longer a cover but a skin, not hiding, revealing. I opened my eyes. The room was full. Dozens of figures now surrounded the throne, some shrouded, others sketched in light, a few flickering like half-formed thoughts. They weren't enemies. They were witnesses, and one by one they knelt, not in worship, in agreement. Each one placed something at the edge of the spiral. Fragments of realms, symbols of power, tokens of allegiance. This was not a coronation, it was acceptance. I was no longer the courier, no longer the servant of unseen forces. I had delivered every part of myself to the threshold and crossed it. Now the throne waits, not for permission, but for command. And beyond these walls, the world stirs, sensing a shift it doesn't yet understand. But it will, because I no longer carry the story. I write it, and I am just getting started. The witnesses remain kneeling, though they did not tremble. They were not here in fear, they were here because they had seen. And once something is seen, it cannot be unseen. Not power, not transformation, not me. My fingers brushed the armrest of the throne. Beneath the obsidian, I felt grooves, runes etched long before I arrived. Names of others who had sat here. Some had ruled, some had burned. None had remained unchanged. The mask no longer felt separate from me. It had rooted into my mind. I could feel it distilling every breath, every thought, every intention, turning noise into will. One of the witnesses stood. Their form flickered, tall, robed in smoke that curled into faces. Their voice was like a low bell struck beneath a frozen lake. And you claim the mantle of threshold? The chamber echoed, not in sound but in consequence. I didn't answer aloud. I didn't need to. I simply breathed. And the throne answered for me. The spiral ignited, not in flame but in memory. Each item on the path flared once, then dissolved into threads of silver that wound themselves around me. The coin of binding became a mark on my palm. The ring of insight coiled around my iris. The stone of vitality beat like a second heart beneath my ribs. The vial of eclipses whispered from within my veins. The tincture rested behind my teeth, ready. The index, no longer a book, became a language only I could speak. The mask was simply me, and the blade and the book, they remained, unclaimed, but not out of reach, reserved, for when even this form must evolve again. I stood from the throne, and the world changed. The chamber cracked outward, space peeling open like parchment soaked in rain. Realities poured through, twisting realms, crossroads of souls, cradles of forgotten gods. I saw doors now, endless doors, each one leading to a different truth, a different trial, a different version of me waiting to be shaped, and one of them pulsed brighter than the rest. Something behind it was screaming, or singing. I stepped toward it. I didn't ask what was inside, because I knew whatever waited behind that door was mine to rewrite. And I had the ink, I had the blood, and I had the will. The door before me pulsed like a wound in space. It wasn't built from wood or stone, but from memory and anticipation, stitched together with the echoes of everything I had not yet become. It didn't wait for me to knock. It opened. No creak, no protest, just silence, folding back to reveal what lay beyond. A field of endless mirrors stretched before me, rising from black earth like grave markers. Each one flickered with light, some dim, some blinding, and in every reflection, me. Not exactly. Fragments, variants, echoes of the self. One bled from the eyes. One wore a crown of serpents. One had wings made of smoke. One knelt in chains of their own forging, smiling anyway. Each version stared back as I stepped forward. They didn't move. They waited. The ground was soft beneath my boots, not mud, not ash, something in between, something forgotten. Then a voice from everywhere and nowhere. You must choose one to walk beside you, and one to bury. The mask over my face cooled. I felt its awareness draw inward, focusing through me. I looked at the mirrors again. There were thousands, maybe more, and I recognized each, the warrior, the scholar, the liar, the martyr, the tyrant, the child, all possible, all mine. I stopped in front of one with scorched edges. The reflection showed me cloaked in blood and fire, unapologetic, absolute. worshipped through fear and legend. This version had made no compromises. The other stood beside it, hollow-eyed but calm. A guide, a weaver, not loved, not feared, but followed. I reached out, touched the second. It breathed. The mirror shattered silently. Light spilled out and wrapped itself around me. This one would walk beside me. I turned back to the first. It smiled, wide, almost proud. Then I reached for it with my bare hand, and I buried it. The shards didn't fall. They imploded, folding into a dark jewel the size of a tooth. I pocketed it without thought. 'Cause even when you bury something, you never truly leave it behind. The mirrors behind me began to fall, one by one, dissolving into dust and wind. And ahead, only one remained. It reflected nothing, just black, a perfect absence. And carved beneath it in lines that bled, now become what they will fear. I stepped through. The world closed around me like the inside of a breath held too long. And somewhere distant, the next name in the graven index began to write itself, in ink that moved like shadow, and it began with my reflection. Crossing through the mirror was like walking into still water. No sound, no resistance, but the weight was there. It clung to my skin like dust that remembered too much. On the other side, there was no sky, just shadow, not empty, endless. The space opened wide, a cathedral of nothing, held up by pillars shaped like thoughts, raw, unfinished, waiting to be given meaning. Each one pulsed with a different rhythm, a heartbeat, a whisper, a scream. The floor beneath my boots wasn't solid, it was woven from voices. Every step forward replayed fragments of what I'd become. Not echoes, intent. The air stirred. Ahead, a shape rose from the dark, massive, rooted, ancient. Not a creature, not a throne, a page, a single floating living page, bigger than buildings, made of stretched parchment and sinew, covered in writing that twisted as I looked at it, words that crawled, the next page of the graven index. But this one wasn't meant to be read, it was meant to be written. A quill formed in my right hand. It wasn't a tool, it was the blade, carved now from bone and memory, the one I hadn't chosen but hadn't left behind. And in my left hand, the book, shadow-bound, its cover finally opening, pages fluttering wildly. It whispered to me in every voice I'd ever silenced. Write what you are, write what you deserve, write what you fear. I stood before the massive page, quill in one hand, truth in the other. The mask over my face smiled, and I wrote. Not gently. I carved words like wounds. Every letter pulled a piece of me from beyond the veil. Pain, power, shame, hunger, names of things I hadn't faced yet. Things I would become. The moment the final letter was laid, the cathedral trembled. The page caught fire, but instead of burning, it sank into me. My skin crawled with symbols. My voice felt layered, like a dozen versions of me spoke at once. And the index at my side, it sealed, not closed, finished, for now. The mask melted into my skin, and I felt it. Not power, permission. To speak what should not be spoken. To name what has never had a name. And somewhere ahead, the world stirred. Not to challenge me. To welcome me. Because now, I was not just the one who wrote the story. I was the one they'd have to write around. The fire of the written page didn't die out. It settled into my bones like memory left to smolder. Every step I took echoed with new gravity, as if the world had begun to weigh me differently. No longer just a figure in the dark, I was the author of it, the threat within it. I walked forward. The space, if you could call it that, folded open ahead of me. The blackness had texture now, not smoke, not fog, something denser like the fabric of unspoken things. It moved around me, made room for me, and then I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. They came from all sides, but not in chaos. They had rhythm, purpose, devotion. I emerged into a wide circle carved into stone that hadn't existed before I needed it. Around its edge stood figures in silence, dozens of them. Tall, draped in veils, each one wearing a fragment of the mask I had absorbed. Not copies, versions. Every self I hadn't chosen. They watched, and they waited. In the center of the circle was a pedestal. Upon it, a mirror, not like the others. This one was blank, smooth, empty. It did not reflect light or shape, only possibility. And in its silence I understood. It wasn't here to show me anything. It was here for me to speak into it, to command what shape the world would take next. So I stepped forward, and I said nothing, because in that moment, even silence bent to me. And the mirror cracked open. The first crack split the mirror down its center. It didn't shatter, it bloomed. Like something inside it had been waiting for permission to break free. Light bled through, not bright, but deep, heavy, ancient. Each of the veiled figures surrounding the circle raised their heads in unison. No eyes visible, no faces shown, but I could feel them watching, not with judgment, but recognition. The mirror pulsed again, and from the cracks spilled out a thread of liquid shadow. It rose into the air, curling like ink in water, and began to weave itself into a shape, not a word, a sigil, new, unseen, undocumented. It was mine. It floated above the pedestal, humming softly, like a heart just beginning to beat. As I watched, the sigil twisted once and snapped itself into my chest. Not as pain, not even as pressure. It became truth. And in that moment, I heard the voice again. The same one that had whispered from the throne. Only now it didn't ask. It declared, "You have been delivered." The circle lit up in segments. The masked witnesses stepped back and vanished, their forms dissolving into trails of starlight. The mirror, now empty, folded into the stone, disappeared. And all that remained was me, standing in the center, sigil burning in my chest. Mask fused to my soul. Every item, book, blade, coin, vial, index, woven into the veins of my being. There were no more doors now, only choices. And every choice I made from this point forward would write itself into the bones of the world. This was no longer a story about what I carried. It was a story about what I would become. And the world would learn me by name, or by fear.